So this is just going to be an impromptu, if you know, podcast episode. Sort of kind of just responding to everything. Because I think that's what this show is going to end up being. And I think that that's the best way for me to produce this kind of content. I don't have anything against structure. And speaking of structure, we're going to talk about structure today. We're going to talk about it soon. But speaking of structure, I don't really care for structure. I care more about the discussion and the flow of ideas and in a stream of, just the natural order of ideas, the natural order of thoughts. I think that when we try to compartmentalize things and when we try to categorize things and when we try to create too much structure, what we end up with is a product that's not genuine. We end up with a product that is not, emotional. I don't think that emotion is something that can be disparaged or should be disparaged. Emotion is a very important part of the human experience. And speech being as limited as it is, writing being as limited as it is, emotion plays a part in our understanding of each other. It plays a part in how we understand ourselves when we're talking to people. When I'm talking to you right now, I'm speaking with a particular tone. I'm speaking with emphasis. I'm speaking with emotion, So to say that emotion isn't necessary, is kind of ridiculous to me. But the point is that structure, I feel like, gets in the way of that to a certain degree because we become more obsessed with the structure of things, with the nature of how things are, than with the thing itself. Okay? And the thing itself that we're talking about here is the conversation. If you're having a conversation with someone, you don't want to be mundane. You don't want to be not in the present. You want to stay engaged with someone. And the way that you stay engaged with someone is that you access their emotions and you get into their emotions and you not play with them, but you certainly don't inhibit yourself with needless structure. Obviously all conversations have an underlying structure that exists. If it's an interview, for instance, you have the interviewer and you have the interviewee. The interviewer asks a particular question, the interviewee responds, and from that point, a conversation ensues. But the underlying structure of that conversation will always be, the interviewer is attempting to mine for some kind of answer. The interviewee is trying to formulate some answer based on their opinion and give it to the interviewer so the interviewer can produce new knowledge that potentially was not known before. And as a result, that's just the structure of that interview. But that doesn't mean that we should allow structure to get in the way of having genuine conversations, of making connections with people, of, attempting to have real, impactful, to gain knowledge in, these ways. So that's all I want to say about structure, is that this podcast, or whatever this ends up being, is going to always, for the most part, be fairly unstructured. I'm going to try to follow the flow of conversation and not the flow of notes or questions that I might have for whoever's on this show, or even for myself or for the audience. This show is just going to flow in whatever direction it finds. That's just what it's going to be. So, with that all being said, the nature of today's show is just going to be kind of responding to some ideas that I'm hearing from Candace Owens whilst listening to Joe Rogan. And the first thing that I want to respond to, because I dropped in onto her interview with Joe Rogan kind of in the midst of what was happening. But she just recently talked about how government wants to be God. And Joe was kind of shocked by this, and I think that's just because of the way that she said it. She said that the government wants to be God, that the government is trying to become God, and it made it sound more like there was some government conspiracy between the media and government itself. And that's not true. She then, qualified herself by saying that she quoted Andrew Breitbart by saying that culture or politics is downstream from culture, and that culture and politics are intertwined. And I certainly think that's true, but I also don't think that it's an outrageous statement to say that the government wants to be God. I'm currently reading a history of Western philosophy by the philosopher Bertrand Russell of the 40s and 50s. And in one of the earliest chapters of the work, it's in the first chapter, The Rise of Greek Civilization. He's talking about early civilizations that preceded the Greeks and that the Greeks are kind of downstream from. And what he talks about is the development of the state and this idea of what the state is. And something that he says in this analysis of the state and government, is that he's talking about Babylon and Egypt, and he's talking about the difference between Babylon and Egypt, and he begins talking about religion. And that's how Candace and Joe got onto that topic of government as God. Basically, what Bertrand Russell says is that the religions of Egypt and Babylonia, like other ancient religions, were originally fertility cults. The earth was female, the sun male. The bull was usually regarded as an embodiment of male fertility, and the bull gods were common. In Babylon, Ishtar, the earth goddess, was supreme among female divinities. Throughout Western Asia, the Great Mother was worshipped under various names. When Greek colonists in Asia Minor found temples to her, they named her Artemis and took over the existing cult. So that's that. That's the origin of some of, those religious ideas. And then he says, a paragraph later, where religion was bound up with the government of an empire, political motives did much to transform its primitive features. A god or goddess became associated with the state and had to give not only an abundant harvest, but victory in war. A rich priestly caste elaborated the ritual and the theology and fitted together into a pantheon of several divinities of the component parts of the empire. Through association with government, the gods became associated with mortality. Lawgivers received their codes from a god. Thus, a breach of the law became impiety. The oldest legal code is that of Hammurabi. So, the point is that government and religion have always been necessarily bound up. That's why it was such a revolutionary idea during the Enlightenment that there should be a separation between church and state. Okay, preceding the Enlightenment, you had this period in European history, in Western history, and we can talk about Asian history, and we can talk about the impulse in Asian history, because it's certainly there, and it's not too dissimilar from European history. But in European history, what you had was this long period of monarchs ruling over people, and they had this divine right of kings, that kings are given their power, given their prestige, given their authority from some higher power. And as a result, all monarchs began to become, they were closely associated with the church. And that's why the church had so much influence over European affairs, is because people still believed that God was the ultimate lawgiver, that all laws and all ideas and all, anything, human reason even, was given to us by some divine deity. And that's why you see so many European monarchs during that time equating themselves to deities, showing themselves as deities. And to take it to, from an Asian perspective, the emperors themselves had this idea that they are given their right to rule via the mandate of heaven. Theirs was a bit more complex in terms of if an emperor fell out of favor, that the emperor necessarily was not in good, in the goodwill of God. Okay, if an emperor was bad, then that must mean that the gods are displeased. So you have to get rid of that emperor. And you even see it today, or you see it relatively contemporarily in, communist states across the world. That's the whole idea behind a personality cult, is that the central figure of that cult, the personality, is the god of that state, is the state religion itself. Stalin, Kim Jong-un, Stalin or Kim Jong-un, think of those people. Hitler, All of those are examples of personality cults, or examples of where the state, the government, has become God. People don't look towards, a deity in the religious sense as much as they do, the picture of Hitler or the picture of Stalin or the picture of Kim Jong-un as all that is right in the world and as the source of all wisdom. That's where you begin to, get the concept of, philosophies centered around these sorts of people. You get Stalinism, you get Leninism, you get, I don't know if there's Hitlerianism, but there certainly is Nazism, which was, totally stemmed from Hitler's mind. Hitler, Nazism is not a real thing. That's not to say that, people can't be Nazis, but Nazism as an ideology isn't actually an ideology. All Nazism is populism. It's a response to anything that you wanted to hear at the time. And, if you read the history of the Third Reich by Richard J. Evans, the coming of the Third Reich in power, and the Third Reich at war, what you come to understand about Nazism is that when Hitler was on the campaign trail in Germany, he didn't have principles that he was really trying to advance. He had like the 21 principles of the Nazi Party or whatever, but he didn't really care what Nazism actually was. All he cared about was getting power. And power is flexible. Power is neutral in a lot of ways. And that's a idea from Michel Foucault, that power is neutral. That it's neither good nor evil, but it is also flexible, it's malleable. And so Hitler, in order to achieve power in Germany, to achieve clout and influence in Germany, he went around Germany, to businesses, to different communities. And when he was there, he slightly modified what he was saying each time to the certain degree that if you ask three people from three different communities, like a business owner, a shop owner, and probably a government official, they're all going to tell, if you ask them what Nazism is, they're going to tell you three different things. Because there is no such thing as Nazism as a philosophical idea. Okay, we can't study Nazism. We can discuss Nazism in the age of Hitler, but think about neo-Nazism. What is it? Is it just racism, anti-Semitism? In which case, why is there anti-Semitism and racism? Why are they independent things if they're supposedly a part of Nazism? Do you understand what I'm saying? Nazism is just an umbrella term for kind of a lot of things that are used by people who self-describe as Nazis, when in fact they're just really anti-Semites, racists, and all these sorts of things. Nazi is a very dubious term, and that's one of the reasons why it's kind of asinine to call someone a Nazi, because all it means is that you're using an umbrella term without being specific. Be more specific if you really want to attack someone. But the point is that power being so malleable and being so flexible, all of these things being centered around this person, religion is obviously tied up with the state. And so when someone like Candace Owens says that the state wants to be God, no one should take that out of context and to say that Candace Owens believes, a conspiracy that the media and the government are aligned in attempting to create, this media cult or this government cult. Okay, this isn't like Donald Trump is giving directives to CNN or Fox and saying, create divisiveness, create derision in the United States so that way that government can become God, so that way I can become God. All she's saying is that the media gravitates around power centers, the government being that big power center. And what she also qualified her statement with is by saying that the government wants to eliminate as many elements as possible that will get people from seeking out government help. But again, I think that's a bit too malicious, to say the least, to say it sounds like the government is actively doing something as opposed to a development. Certainly, the government wants people to go to the government for help because it sustains and supports the government infrastructure, this network of bureaucrats. Because at the end of the day, no matter how corrupt government becomes, government power and power always stems from the people who follow a particular government. Okay, without the people, without the support of the people, without the people needing to go to government, there really is no government. The government can use force, But at least in the United States, you know, the government only has so much money that they can expend, and it only has so many troops that would be willing to turn their guns on the American people, you know? And I don't think that our military does enough brainwashing. Not that I'm saying they do brainwashing, but I am saying that I don't think that you can brainwash Americans to the point where they would think that it was necessary and proper and correct to shoot their family. You know, we don't have a mainstream, we don't have a Trumpism, really. Anyone who says that there is a such thing as Trumpism is talking about a bureaucratic Trumpism, an internal Trumpism, not a public discourse on the same level as something like Stalinism. You know, there is no guiding text. There is no historical trend towards Trumpism. You know, Stalinism was a historical development of Russian society based around this idea that there is a strong central power, that, you know, one man can control the entire government. Whereas in the United States, we have a tradition of a separation of powers. We have a tradition of, you know, the people being the origin of all power. And as a result, it's very hard for the government to centralize. And even though they've done a fairly good job, they still rely desperately upon the people to derive a lot of their power. And as a result, the government will still continue to try to do as much as it can to centralize its power, to bring more people towards its power center, so that way, you know, it can maintain its control. If you've ever read 1984, that's kind of the gist of the book. And I think that it's a powerful message, is that essentially there is no end goal to power except for power, control, and security. This vague idea of security that's almost childish. You know, read Macbeth, read 1984, and you'll understand power as something that's not really all that deep. I mean, power is solely for the sake of power. And I think that's something that's very scary. And I think that power and control are all that the state wants, the government wants. You know, no government in history has willingly given up power. Governments, power centers always amass power. They become heavier. They become larger centers of mass, not less. Okay? Unlike neutron stars and unlike stars in the sky, they don't eventually burn out. They do. They collapse after they've amassed too much mass, after there's no more mass for them to collect in the universe. However, we are in a dubious situation as a society. If we want to continue to have society as it exists today, peaceably for the most part, regardless of our conflicts, then what we need and what we should desire is that there should be an even balance between government at large, government as this power center, and the people as the larger system. If the government and the people are binary stars, that is, they orbit around some central point of mass, which is this idea of a society that exists in peace and in perpetuity, you know, then we would at least still want the people as a star to be much heavier than the government. As it exists today, the media doesn't necessarily conspire with the government, but they certainly do legitimize the government as a means towards amassing power and maintaining control over the people. The people, when they consume media, when they go on social media and they continue to dive into the derisiveness and the divisiveness and to follow these government myths that are being created, we give more power to these government centers. We become weaker because we're reliant on these power centers, the media, the government, to answer all of our questions, to give us the meaning to our lives. In any dubious government situation, the aim of the government is to have the people sustain the government and to give the government greater meaning, to make the government more prescient in their lives, and to make the government a central part of their lives. The government wants you to feed into its mythology that the government and politics are the center of life, not arts, not sciences, not, you know, anything else that you could be doing. Instead, focus on the government. Focus on how we're being governed. Focus on what's happening in Washington. Focus on what's happening with the politicians, the bureaucrats, the president, the Congress. You know, the president is the biggest celebrity in the world, bigger than Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, Pusha T, Drake. Any of these people are much smaller than the president. For a long time, we have been on this trend in the United States of turning our presidents into celebrities, into our personal gods. They are false prophets, and they are attempting to make you more reliant on them than you need be, because they recognize that their entire ability to maintain power and to have power is based on how much you like them, on how much they can keep your attention, not on what they're actually doing for you. That's what upsets me about a lot of things, a lot of elections that are coming up. For instance, in Texas here, we have our congressional races coming up where it's going to be between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. I don't deny or doubt the sincerity of either of their messages. But how many congressmen have been elected in the past decade, 2 decades, saying that they're going to go in and do something, saying that they're going to go in and get rid of super PACs and get rid of lobbyists and get rid of all these sorts of things, that they're going to help reform, the justice system, XXXX, X, Y, and Z, saying that they're going to do this and that. And, 20 years down the line, we still have super PACs and we still have, these same people doing the same things, and nothing's really changing. Certainly, a lot of legislature does go through every day and every year. We have hundreds of bills that get passed every year, but how often are these bills are these bills on things that we actually care about and things that we actually asked for as citizens? And you'll notice that it's still incredibly difficult for citizens to actually speak up about the topics that they want to. And I'm not an advocate for things like, a direct democracy, because I think that would fall apart very quickly. But certainly, I don't think that we as people are influencing the government in the way that we think we are. We are continuing to feed the government beast and continuing to expand and grow this government so that it can support itself rather than supporting us. There are still so many tragedies that are happening in our nation, and it doesn't seem like the answer is coming from government. And I think that there are a lot of people who are beginning to realize that, but I think there are a lot of people who are buying into the spectacle and buying into the idea, even though it's clearly apparent that the only way to solve our problems has to come from us. We're not going to solve our problems by looking at government. It's just not going to happen. So, I don't know. I think that's all I really want to say on that particular issue of the government becoming a god, a deity, any of these sorts of things. Because I think it's totally true. And I think that we just do focus on government and politics and all these sorts of things a bit too much. I'm all for the idea that we should focus on politics and that we should be informed citizens. But when our entire downtime is being consumed by, media sources telling us not only what to think, but this is what you should be responding to right now. This is the cultural thing. This is what you should be focused on, as opposed to just doing something else aside from being on, either social media or just the media in general. I think that, I don't know. That's just it. I mean, that's what I wanted to say on this topic, and that's what I wanted to get out. I don't know. I hope a lot of that made sense. This was just a quick little drop episode of If You Know, You Know. There will probably be more of these little quick episodes in the future. I hope that you enjoyed it on some level. I don't know. Yeah. Also, I'm aware that I did not talk about structures, like I said I was going to in the beginning. I can briefly talk about structures, probably, in terms of, I guess, the government as a superstructure, as, this God structure. I mean, the brief idea of it, I think, is that the government is trying to support itself. The structure will always try to support itself. You know, if the government is a house, then the walls are going to try to support the doors, and the doors are going to try to protect the rooms, you know? And I think that the more pressure that gets put on the government to try and stuff more in, the structure will eventually fall apart. But that won't keep the structure, won't keep whoever is running the structure from attempting to put more into it, from attempting to add more things to support itself. And I think it's dangerous. That's an idea. The end.